The next part of our brain that we need to consider is called the limbic system. This is our emotional or visceral brain, and it has some significant parts to it. It has what's called the amygdaloid body, also called the amygdala. And this is where anger, danger, fear responses, and recognizing fearful expressions are located at. They've actually done studies in some criminals, and they've discovered that their amygdala is a little larger. The second part of it is called the cingulate gyrus, and it plays a role in expressing emotions via gestures and resolves mental conflict. So the limbic system, in fact, the word limbus means circular, and that's kind of what we see here in this medial view of the cerebrum. The next part of the limbic system is called the hippocampus, and the hippocampus is responsible for converting new information into long-term memory. And this long-term memory is something that you have repeated over and over. As you now know in your journey through A&P1, is that you repeat short-term information over and over until it's stored in long-term memory. We'll be talking about that coming up as well. So, the structures that you need to know the septum pellucidum. Remember, that was the membrane between the two lateral ventricles. The corpus callosum was that commissural network that connected both hemispheres. You don't need to know the fiber tracts connecting the limbic system, called the fornix and the anterior commissure, as well as the septal nucleus, dentate gyrus, or parahippocampal gyrus. You're welcome to read about them in the book, but I'm not going to test you on them. The olfactory bulb is important because it's actually located at the top of the nose and has specialized receptors, olfactory receptors, that are going to sense the smells that travel to the superior portion of the nose. So the limbic system is closely associated with the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus has many, many different functions, including the autonomic nervous system, emotional responses. It has feelings. It controls some different hormones like oxytocin and ADH. And it potentially explains why, if there's something going on with the body, that definitely influences our brain. And that's called a psychosomatic illness. For many, many years, people used to say, well, that's all in your head. And they didn't really take it seriously. But the medical community is starting to do more of that, thankfully, because psychosomatic illnesses are real illnesses. So there's an interaction of the limbic system with the prefrontal lobe to react emotionally to conscious understanding. And remember, the prefrontal lobe is a significant part of the brain that is going to develop with maturity. And as well, if somebody has had maybe a poor childhood or traumatic experiences, it could explain why their prefrontal lobe is not necessarily developed. So that could cause some issues. So other things that the reticular formation helps to control are coarse limb motions, and also it will influence things like the vasomotor center, which you're going to learn about a lot next semester. But essentially, it causes dilation or constriction of various blood vessels throughout the body to control blood vessel. It also controls the cardiac center, so it could increase the speed of the heart, slow it down, increase contractility. And then finally, it also can influence the respiratory center. So if somebody is not responding in a normal emotional way to certain things, this could account for some of those changes that might occur with respiration, where they hyperventilate, or changes in the cardiac system. So the next couple slides are going to show kind of a summary of these things. We'll get to in just a minute, but before we do that, we have this slide on the reticular formation. So we saw the structures of it here. In this slide, we know that the reticular formation, aka RAS, is going to govern the arousal of the brain as a whole. So it keeps the cortex alert and conscious and enhances its excitability. So it filters out repetitive and weak stimuli, so we're not aware of them. For example, if you happen to have shoes on right now, you are not consciously aware of that fact. But if you take a shoe off, then you're aware of it. But there's thousands of other stimuli that are sensory, and you're not necessarily aware of them. So right now, with the shirt that you have on, there are lots of sensory receptors that are directly under that shirt. All of that represents sensory information that is being sent to the brain. But the reticular activating system is filtering out that weak stimuli so that we're not focusing on that. The reticular activating system can be inhibited by things like alcohol, sleep-inducing drugs, so things like zolpidem, which is Ambien, tranquilizers, or a real common one to do this especially is LSD. They've shown that somebody under the effect of LSD is seeing all kinds of things that aren't actually there. And they're aware of all of these additional stimuli. So the reticulospinal tract, as we know from the name of it now, it's a descending pathway. It helps to control coarse movements or skeletal muscles during coarse limb movements as well. So let's take a look at this diagram and look at the pathway for the reticular activating system. So there's sensory axons that synapse with RAS. They could be coming from the eye, visual impulses, from the ear, auditory impulses. So this may explain why certain students like to study in a busy area to help to keep their brain alert. So even though they're in a busy Starbucks or Panera or whatever it is, that extra stimuli is being filtered out by their brain and they're able to focus. So ascending general sensory tracts like touch, pain, temperature are also included. Those RAS neurons are going to relay the stimuli to the cerebrum through the thalamus. Remember that the thalamus is that relay station. That continuous stream of sensory stimuli keeps the cerebrum aroused and alert. And so finally, the descending pathways are from the reticular formation, that nuclei to help the spinal cord, and they help regulate skeletal and visceral muscle activity.